Welcome to the Coach Harp Show. Today we have a very successful individual and a professional who has been working with the police department, and he has also been giving back to the community. He believes that it's good to give back to the community. Kal, welcome to our show.
Harp, thanks for having me on the show. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Kal, I noticed that you've taken an interest in the law enforcement. What made you get into that field?
Well, I was in university and on my way to law school, and I was going to be preparing to write my LSAT. And then there was a neat opportunity that arose in my third year of university called the Summer Student Constable Program, which was put on by the RCMP. So it was part of the recruitment drive, and they wanted to obviously provide university students an opportunity to experience what it's like to be a law enforcement officer. So what this program entailed is that they would give you pretty intense 1 month long legal training, combat training, driving training, but no weapons. And then they would put you on the street in a uniform with a senior police officer in a particular district. And for the entire summer, you would have a chance to experience what it means to be a police officer. It was eye-opening. It was a sobering moment. I think up until that point, I was very naive and very insulated about how the real world works because I was primarily academic, stayed in sports, focused on school, never really experienced the outside world and the seedy underbelly of society in terms of what goes on, the drugs, the gangs, all that other stuff. And so my first exposure to it, I was just absolutely attracted to it because you can make a real significant social impact at a grassroots level. And I just felt that the real finger on the pulse is in policing. And so I abandoned my pursuit of law school, and I finished my university degree, and I applied to the Vancouver Police Department, and I got in. And now it's my 21st year of policing.
Congratulations. That's a lot of 21 years. That's awesome. Kal, thank you for sharing your input on the first question that I asked. The second question I ask is, what is your drive that you started this foundation that you give back to the community?
I got to be honest with you. When I first got into policing, honestly, I believe that, you know what, we'd be making a significant social impact right away, and we'd be able to get out there and make an immediate difference. Like, I know it sounds very naive, like an idealist, that there's the black and the white, and there's the good guys and the bad guys, the thin blue line that separates the order from the chaos, and us versus them kind of mentality. So we were out there catching bad guys, but policing in itself, at its very core, at its essence, is reactive. So we were going from call to call to call. And honestly, sometimes it felt the virtual equivalent of shoveling water, like you're not getting anywhere. You responded, you're putting out little fires, and sure, you're catching some very bad guys, which was the positive aspect of it, because you want to put these predators in jail. But at the same time, you didn't find that sense of internal satisfaction. So I became disenfranchised relatively quickly, about 3-4 years into the job, because I just felt that there was more I could be doing. And so that became very evident and apparent when I transferred to the downtown east side. And it was the best move I ever could have made, because in the downtown east side, it's a 6-block radius, and it's proactive policing, not reactive. There's going to be some reactive elements to it, but you're out there on a daily basis, walking the pavement as a beat cop, running into the same individuals day in and day out. And so you get a chance to know who these people are, the drug addicts, the drug dealers, the gangsters, local people in the area. And that's where you can start making a real significant social impact. But nonetheless, I mean, it's one of the largest open air drug markets in the world, in the downtown east side. And I think the most disturbing aspect of it was that I would see youth coming into the downtown east side on a regular basis, engaging in the open air drug market. They'd either be selling or using. And it bothered me because we'd be arresting these kids, charging them, pushing them through the criminal justice system. They'd be convicted, spewed out on the other end to YDC, which is youth detention, only to come out as more hardened criminals and to re-engage in a perpetual cycle of violence and to recidivate. They'd go commit more crimes, we'd arrest them again, back to that same cycle over and over again. And I'd return to my locker at the end of shift, and I'd be taking off my uniform, and I wouldn't find that internal sense of satisfaction. Once again, it's just that something was off. You know what? Probably what bothered me the most is that society was quick to point a finger at these kids, saying, well, you know what, you should know better. You committed that crime. Now you're going to have to suffer the consequences. And it always bothered me because I'm thinking, like, where does society get the audacity and the arrogance to point a finger at these kids? Did society bother taking these kids by the hand and guiding them, mentoring them, teaching them, pointing them in the right direction, giving them the resources, the support that they needed to be successful? No, they did not. These kids came from lower socioeconomic backgrounds, impoverished conditions. They had never had a chance to play organized sports or engage in extracurricular activities. Yet, I mean, we stand here as judge and jury. Like, I don't believe in that. I felt that, I mean, at least give these kids an opportunity, a chance to survive, to succeed. And so I remember there was this one clear tipping point that happened for me. It was 2 a.m. in the morning. I was the acting sergeant in my police cruiser. And I pulled into one of the lanes at 2 a.m. in the morning, and it was raining pretty hard. But I remember this kid, who I later learned was 14 years old, sitting behind a garbage dumpster getting his crack cocaine pipe ready. And I already made up my mind that I'm not going to arrest him. And so I get out of the car. As I do, he throws down his pipe and he begins to walk away. And I call him over. I'm like, hey, come here. And he keeps walking, doesn't turn around. I say it again, this time a little bit louder. This time he turns around, comes back, puts his wrist in front of me. He goes, if you're going to cuff me, do it now. Otherwise, I take it up for you to go. And I said, well, no, I mean, I want to talk to you first. I'm not going to arrest you. But where are you from? Where's your house? Like, what are you doing here? Why are you doing these drugs? Like, what are your circumstances? And I was being very sincere. I really wanted to know. And he could see that I was being very authentic with my line of questioning. So he looks me in the eyes. He doesn't answer my questions. He poses the following questions to me. He goes, if your mom left you when you were just a kid and you don't know who she is or where she is, your dad's lying shit-faced on the sofa right now, has no idea where you are, and your brother's sitting in jail for dealing drugs and there's nobody else at home. He goes, where would you be? And I think that was my moment of epiphany, where I just realized, you know what, this is unfair. These kids come from these types of backgrounds and they're byproducts of the environment, and we should be giving them the love and the guidance and the support they need to succeed. So I called MCFD, which is the Ministry of Children and Families, and they came down and put this kid into a foster home, but it was a far more positive setting than where he was living in at the moment. But subsequent thereafter, I went to my inspector that was immediately in charge of my section, and I asked him for some nominal funding. So I received $500 to run free programs for inner city kids in the downtown east side. So I took about a month and a half to organize a inner city school soccer tournament. And it was absolutely free of cost. And I used that $500 to purchase equipment, medals, trophies, certificates, water, food, you name it. And I booked a park in downtown east side. And on the day of the tournament, about 150 kids from the inner city school catchment area came out, and we all played soccer together. So it was myself and a couple of other off-duty police officers. We wanted to volunteer our time. And these kids came in with hardened, calloused attitudes, with raised eyebrows, very skeptical of police and very cynical. It's like, what are the cops up to now? Type of attitudes. And so, but over the day, you could see all that melting away, and these kids are having fun with us. And at the end of the day, once the tournament's over, they're holding their certificates, their trophies, they got their medals around their necks, and they're all giving us big hugs and saying, hey, thank you for doing this for us. And I just knew at that moment, and it just reinforced and bolstered my resolve to do more for these kids. So every single year that program grew exponentially, so much so that within 7 years, we went from Strathcona Park to renting out all of BC Place Stadium with over 2,000 kids absolutely free of cost playing soccer on the turf. And that became the impetus behind Kids Play, which I created in 2015.
That's awesome. I really like how you really give back to the community there, because I feel that's really important, and that's very admirable how an individual could make a change in society. So I really appreciate you sharing that with us. As you were talking about how you're giving back to the community, how is it so important to give back to our community, and why?
You know what, Harp, if you take a look at, I mean, you're of South Asian descent, so am I. And if you take a look at where we come from, our ancestors, I mean, they came from small, these nomadic tribes in Punjab back in the day that lived in small little villages. And the saying that it takes a village to raise a child, I mean, that's essentially where it comes from, that the entire village would be engaged, involved with helping out one another. They would be, obviously, come from an agrarian society where we were all in the agriculture sector, and our ancestors were farmers. So they'd be out farming their lands, and they'd be helping out one another farm their lands too. And at the end of the day, if they saw some kid that's straying away, It didn't matter whose kid it was. I mean, they would make sure that the parents would find out and that they would be there to help out the kid if they were in trouble. So everyone took care of everyone else. And that's the way it should be. It should be this, this collective sense of responsibility and moral and social obligation to one another to help one another out. And they were happy people. I mean, they weren't exceptionally well off. They weren't wealthy. They lived off the fat of the land, but they were happy because they had the basics and they were very grateful for what they have. And I think we've lost that. We really have. We've lost our way in that respect, that we're no longer grateful for the simple things in life. And now if you take a look at it, it's all about wealth being the measure of success, the yardstick measure of success in our community. And it's all about how much money you have, what car you're driving, what kind of house you live in. And these kids are seeing that. So what SAD essentially done is it's ingrained a sense of instantaneous gratification where these kids need it now. They're 16, 17, but they need to be driving a brand new Audi now. They need to be wearing Gucci shoes now. They need to be wearing a Prada belt now. They need to be wearing a Rolex. They need to be traveling to exotic destinations. And so when the parents can't afford this lifestyle, these kids get into the drug trade because it's exceptionally lucrative and they see it as easy money. And they like all that, the glamorized lifestyle that comes with it as well. So personally, I think we need to reinstill the fundamental values and principles of how we used to live in terms of taking care of one another. So in terms of helping one another, I think it's just ingrained in me, and that's how I was raised. And that's the type of example that we're trying to put out there into society and inspire others to live the same way, is that just because it's somebody else's kid that's involved in that drug and gang lifestyle, doesn't mean you don't have a responsibility to that family or them. Well, a lot of people would say, well, why should I? It's not my kid. It's not my family. Like, why would I care if that kid dies from drug and gang warfare? Because it's our community. Just on last week, there was a shooting at Walmart in a busy parking lot, 4 p.m. on a Saturday. And imagine that, like, if these same people that say it's not my problem are walking with their kids into Walmart and a stray bullet hits their kid and kills them. Now what? Now it is your problem. You are going to have to deal with it. This street level violence exists, and we can't be an ostrich with the head in the sand, take the head in the sand approach and pretend it doesn't. It does exist. And the only way that we're going to diffuse and resolve all this is by working together.
I'm a big believer of giving back to the community too, because if you don't give back to the community, what are we really teaching our young people, right? Thank you for sharing that. Kal, as you were explaining how to give back to the community, when does the transformation happen with high-risk youth?
It's very difficult to say. It's constantly organically evolving, Harp. You can't say that there was one clear salient point where that transformation happens. It takes years and years and years for these kids to eventually get involved in that lifestyle. There's multiple factors that are at play that come together in order to create this perfect storm. But the most important one, I think, is at home, where if you live in an environment where your parents are constantly absent or negligent with respect to their responsibilities in terms of raising the child, then sure, that child's going to head down that path and trajectory. The two most important factors which lead kids into that lifestyle is identity and acceptance. So what I mean by that is, these kids as a whole, by their very disposition and nature, are always seeking acceptance. I think human beings as a whole are. We always want to be accepted. We always want to feel that we belong. And these kids normally find that sense of belonging at school or in a sports team or at home in a family unit, in a family setting. But where they don't find that, if they're not playing sports, they feel like they're a pariah or ostracized at school, and they don't feel that they're accepted at home because their parents are never really home, then these kids are going to try to find acceptance elsewhere. And normally they end up finding acceptance in a gang because these drug dealers convince and manipulate these kids into believing it's a brotherhood and that they'll all take care of one another and that these drug dealers are like older brothers and that they'll look after them. That's far from the truth. These guys are predators. They prey on these kids and use them. And when they're done using them, they throw them away off to the side because they're dispensable and they can use other kids. And the second point I made was identity. These kids are always seeking to establish identity. They want to feel like they belong to something. And so normally a sports team can be an identity. Or belonging to some kind of club at school can be identity, or language, culture, arts, that's all identity. But these kids find identity in gang settings where they're given gang emblems and logos and signs, and they feel like they belong to that. And so with that comes power and money. So these are two major factors that you need to take into consideration. And with respect to transformation, Harp, it's becoming earlier and earlier. Kids in grades 6 and 7 are now being recruited. They're being selected, recruited, groomed for a couple of years, and then they're released to do business for these drug dealers and dial-a-dope lines by the time they're in grade 9 and 10. So we need to be cognizant of these kinds of things.
I want to say, just with what you're saying, stuff like that, and how you're sharing the story of all the changes that you've seen, stuff like that, it's really giving me another insight from your view of what you're sharing with us today. So I want to say thank you for that. If somebody wants to get connected with you, how are they able to get in touch with you?
604-619-1064. 604-619-1064. Give me a call.
Awesome. Kal Dosanjh, I want to say thank you for being on the Coach Harp Show this morning.
It was my absolute pleasure, Harp. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.